You're watching News 24, and we're sitting down today with political analyst Ralph Matekga, who has written a book called When Zuma Goes. Now, the adage is, all things come to an end, and your book, Ralph, deals with the day, the time, the era when Zuma is no longer president of South Africa.
Exactly. I look at what's going to happen to South Africa when he leaves, but in order to answer that question in a reasonable manner, I look at where does he come from. How is it that South Africa managed to produce someone such as President Jacob Zuma as a leader of the ANC and also as a leader of the country?
And you do begin, when you start the book, with the history of Thabo Mbeki and his legacy within the ANC and how that might explain some of Zuma's rise to power. For our readers and our audience, how does that work?
Well, it is very important because when Jacob Zuma came about as an alternative, because he came about as an alternative to Mbeki, and for me I had to think about how do I frame Mbeki's leadership. What is it that President Jacob Zuma was an alternative to? And the book actually started with an academic journal and a chapter in an academic book which I titled The ANC Leadership Crisis and the Age of Populism in South Africa. For me, Jacob Zuma came about to cure the bad relationship that South Africans had with Thabo Mbeki. And what defined that relationship was that President Thabo Mbeki was very technocratic, centralized power, was not responsive, focused a lot on being statesman instead of providing maybe an intimate leadership that South Africans want. And then came President Jacob Zuma, who said that I'm going to deal with this, I'm going to be accessible, I'm a man of the people, I'm going to be there to listen to the people. And therefore, he came about. That's how he came about, became an alternative. And my question is, was it a realistic move? Could he really have been that kind of an alternative? Did he live to that? Was he honest in packaging himself and being packaged by his allies as men of the people? Or was just that a sinister kind of motivation to get him into power and probably spend the next 8 years lining up his pockets and that of his allies?
It's a good question, because it's an issue that comes up repeatedly, scandal after scandal, with the head of state. His likability, his popularity with at least one sort of segment of the South African population. I think his stronghold in KwaZulu-Natal is increasingly important, his rural stronghold, and his legacy as a kind of likable character compared to Mbeki, who many people found quite removed, quite cold, prone to quoting, you know, kind of obscure poets from, like, you know, the 1800s or whatever it was. Do you think that that image of Zuma has lost its kind of currency as his leadership has continued, or does it still hold?
Actually, it was never genuine. It was just a figmentation of people's imagination by then, because if you look at history, people were talking about his leadership, were saying that he's accessible and all that. And when you go back and look, you should ask yourself, where exactly or when did he demonstrate that kind of leadership? Because the best that we know about President Jacob Zuma, if I recall very well, and I do try to recall all this fact, was when he used to ride a train at some point. He was the head of the so-called moral regeneration. He was the MEC in KZN, and my argument is that those positions that he occupied are not sufficient to allow someone to demonstrate the style of leadership in a way that you can actually compare that with a sitting president by then, who happens to have been Thabo Mbeki by then. So my view is that South Africans were very desperate in creating that man of the people, in trying to cure their relationship with state institution in a way that they saw Jacob Zuma as a possible platform to that. And I have to say, it's not just about the people in KZN. It's not just about people in rural areas. You can go back to the media, you'll see the quotes where some of the CEOs in this country were saying that there is a great opportunity, he's accessible, he listens to business and all. The reason is because every time they tried to talk to Thabo Mbeki, they felt that he's raising issues of transformation, he's raising tough issues that did not allow them to participate in the debate. And President Jacob Zuma came about, most people were quite happy, including the private sector, about that. I remember one of an academic actually went to see him in his office, and that academic went with his book and a CV. And that academic was very critical about Thabo Mbeki, for example. I'm not going to tell you.
I want to know who it is. You must tell me.
And that person went there by then because the rejection of Thabo Mbeki blinded people made it possible for them to critically evaluate exactly who Jacob Zuma is. So it was just taken as an alternative without a critical evaluation as to what are the characteristics of this alternative. People just built that character on their own as to what President Jacob Zuma is. And when I look at his leadership, perhaps that's how he has been. Perhaps he's true to himself. He did not betray anyone. He has always been like that. Maybe have people asked about him, went into how he dealt with people, went into the relationship he has had with people, including the likes of Shabir Shaikh. Maybe the story was always there, but we did not look into that.